follows. For your safety and as part of the health and safety policy of this fire alarm, please leave this hall immediately by the central doors, the door at the back of the hall, or the door to the left. Leave the building immediately by the nearest fire exit, turn left along the pavement without crossing the road, pass beyond the end of the building and wait at the bottom of the cockpit steps beyond 3 birdcage walk for further instructions. I should add that we're not expecting a fire alarm. Can I also remind you about mobile phones? And finally, in housekeeping matters, just to apologise to the ladies present, the Institution of Mechanical Engineers has been very male-dominated, therefore all the toilets are male-orientated. We have tried very hard to split it up, but just please bear with us. There are a few panels and a little bit wobbly, but hey-ho, we've tried to do our best. But the cloakroom is for everybody. The forum this year, during the last year, we've made a number of significant developments. We've launched a dedicated website, which contains the latest news as well as details of the forum. And many thanks to the British Equestrian Federation, who have masterminded and looked after our web presence for the last few years. That's been really much appreciated. We're also live streaming the forum this year for the first our reach, and we've already got 800 people signed up to it. And welcome to you, boys and girls, who are actually signing into this forum. We're also recording today's proceedings, and please, there's a note in your programme on page 14, but if you don't want your question or any comments that anyone makes recorded in the proceedings. So can you just have a look at what it says on page 14. The forum couldn't exist without the help of our sponsors. And I'm really grateful to those sponsors there who are our real gold sponsors, who without them we would really struggle. And it's very encouraging to see people have continued to give us support, and many, many thanks. We also have friends of the forum, both corporate friends and additional friends, and you can see them listed there. And again, we're really, really grateful for their help. We will be posting on Facebook and tweeting throughout the day, and please feel free to interact with us over these 2 platforms and use the hashtag NEFAT and hashtag Horsepower. We also have Pulsar with us, who will be publishing podcasts containing interviews throughout the day, and the podcast will be freely available. So as you can see, we are moving more or less into the 21st century. On to the programme. The first session is the horse industry in a changing world, and I'm delighted to welcome Lord Gardner, who is the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Rural Affairs and Biosecurity at DEFRA, to give the DEFRA view. So, Lord Gardner, over to you.
My lords, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honour to come and address this distinguished audience of the equine world. For many years I attended this forum sitting in the main area, and I always found it a really worthwhile and fascinating day. And I do say the word I'm inspired. I'm inspired by the many people who contribute to the vibrancy of the equestrian sector in our country. As I read in Horse and Hound every week, the range of the use of the horse and also the advances in welfare I'm particularly interested in. And we're all here today because we care about the horse and recognise the important role this wonderful animal plays not only in our lives, but in the lives of so many. For myself, we are busy preparing the Contrapoint, which has been on the family farm since 1912. And that again is another extraordinary event when local horses are competing with each other and gives great pleasure. And I think my private office are asking me to be on a course next week on Friday at Cheltenham, when also we are going to see some extraordinary examples of courage of both riders and, of course, horses. And the forum has for many years been this invaluable gathering of expertise and learning. And I do thank Tim Brigstock and the committee for organising what has always been a worthwhile day, and I know today will be too. And I do want to take this opportunity, because DEFRA clearly have a key role in a leadership role. I do want to acknowledge what Jeanette Allen, in her leadership in forming the British Horse Council, combining the Equine Sector Council and the British Horse Industry Federation into one voice. I think that is a very strong message. And similarly, Nick Russ, CEO of the British Horse Racing Authority, along with colleagues from the Thoroughbred Breeders Association and Weatherby's, for the real engagement with DEFRA on the challenges and opportunities for the UK thoroughbred industries as we prepare to leave the EU. And I'm also particularly fortunate on the Animal Health and Welfare Board for England. Michael Seals is here, I know, but I do want to express my gratitude for the equine expertise which Professor Tim Morris brings to its essential work. And I continue to be impressed by the drive and determination of the sector, working to enhance the welfare of an animal which is obviously very close to our hearts. Riding horses, indeed being thrown from them, I believe is one of the greatest of levellers. Clearly, making the most of the opportunities afforded by EU exit is essential. We must not only maintain but enhance our great equine tradition. I know how important the international movement of equines is to many of you, and the critical role of the tripartite agreement. My priority for day one is the movements to continue with minimal delay and bureaucracy, while safeguarding welfare, biosecurity and disease control. Where change is necessary, let us work together to ensure it is in the interest of the horse and ourselves. We have always had a good understanding of the key issues of the sector, and we need to continue to drill down into the precise detail of the implications and ensure that every voice within the sector has been heard. To this end, we will shortly embark on an extensive period of more directed stakeholder engagement. The UK equine industry is a global exemplar, and I would like to take every opportunity afforded by exit to enhance our international reputation for the future. Continuing to work constructively together to achieve our common goals is an essential component of that. Turning to regulations for horse riding establishments. For many, their love for riding and working with horses begins in riding establishments. It is vital they act as ambassadors of modern welfare standards. In order to deliver this, we laid regulations before Parliament in February, meaning that licensees will have to abide by these standards in order to acquire and maintain a license. And I should say at this junction, no one who abides by this has anything to worry about at all. This is about raising standards throughout. Debates on the new regulations will take place later this month in both houses. If accepted by Parliament, the regulations will come into force on the 1st of February. And we've not stopped there. We've also put renewed emphasis on appropriate training and qualification of inspectors. And we could not have done this alone, and I would like to thank members of the Equine Sector Council for their work in helping to formulate the new regulations and guidance. We've also updated the Horse Welfare Code. Of course, we all have a duty of care for these extraordinary animals, and it is so important when we ask these animals to work for us that we ensure that they are cared for with the highest respect and do not suffer pain. I attended the 90th anniversary reception of the World Horse Welfare on Tuesday, and I was particularly struck by what Her Royal Highness said on these matters about the emphasis that we must not, in what we do, cause pain. And so I do congratulate Growley Owers and all at the World Horse Welfare on their achievements over 90 years and more to come. And to enhance welfare, we must look at the entire sector. The Horse Code contains a wealth of information about good welfare and the requirements of the Animal Welfare Act. And again, I'm most grateful to the Horse Trust for helping us update the code. The code was laid before Parliament in December and will come into force next month. We often distinguish between health and welfare, but in my mind they are absolutely intertwined. I'm pleased we continue to advance as a nation on equine health. Indeed, the UK remains a front runner. And I highlight the work of the Equine Disease Coalition together with the Animal Health Trust, the British Equine Veterinary Association and the Thoroughbred Breeders Association, developing a pilot to increase industry responsibility for the control of contagious equine metritis. And also, our scientists at Pirbright are for the first time developing models of disease spread in the UK horse population and currently testing UK leash populations for their capacity to spread African horse sickness. We have recently developed a new fast and portable diagnostic test, and there has been encouraging progress in terms of vaccine. I turn to ragwork only because I've been dealing with some correspondence on the matter, and I took a rather strong view. This is a matter in which I do receive, as I say, correspondence, and I recognise that for many landowners there are, with equine and livestock interests, that this does need to be taken seriously. And I would like to take the opportunity to promote the excellent toolkit developed by the British Horse Society, available on their website. And I do hope that all agencies, and particularly in the livestock areas, will please take note that this is a very dangerous plant for people to have close to the livestock. The equine passport regulation, I'm getting on to the areas where I think we're all in the frustrated mode, but I am pleased that we will be laying the new regulations on the equine passport regulation as soon as practicable. And having listened closely to the sector, we intend to extend microchipping requirements to all equidae of all ages, and I do note there is strong support for the introduction of civil sanctions as an alternative to prosecution's breach of the rules. I recognise the role also of the semi-wild ponies as part of the national herd and our heritage, and at DEFRA we are looking closely at the detail in order to find what I believe is the right balance of flexibility for feral ponies while safeguarding welfare and the need for robust procedures at slaughter. And on the Central Equine Database, there has been a tremendous amount of hard work, some complexity to get this ready for launch. And I appreciate the efforts of many PIOs that have provided their data. But I have to be candid, not all of those records were of the top order, and it has taken considerable time and effort to remedy. And further than that, there are a small number of PIOs who have not been forthcoming in supplying their data as their peers. And this is holding up completion. And I would encourage everyone, because I do believe this equine database is a force for good. We do need to engage with everyone if we are to have a fully up-to-date central equine database. I'm very pleased that the system is now up and running with a majority of PIOs and well in excess of 1 million records. And this means that the database can finally play its part in safeguarding welfare and the food chain. You'll shortly be hearing from Stuart Everett from Equine Register, so if there are any questions, may I very tactfully suggest that they might be moved in this direction at one time. I'm sorry that my time is getting short and I've been very lucky not to have the card yet, but I would have liked to stay the whole day, but unfortunately Chief Whip this afternoon was scheduled me to reply to a debate on inland waterways. But earlier this morning I discussed with Chief Constable Dave Jones on matters relating to the rural crime strategy. Its focus on livestock, and I welcome this additional focus, and I'm looking forward to future collaborations with the Chief Constable. I'm also very sorry to be missing all of the afternoon afternoon. I did want to flag up, I'm so sorry I'm not hearing about the Suffolk horse. I live in Suffolk and we should champion these great heavy horses and rare animals. And so I've spoken about a range of things that DEFRA is seeking to do. We want to do more. We want to have the British reputation of the strongest animal health and welfare legislation, and that must continue. It's not enough, 10 minutes if I may say, to fully extend and promote the importance of equines in the UK to the very fabric of our society. They're central to the rural economy, to sport, recreation, accessibility to people of all abilities, and a passion for millions of people which I share. But you know that already, everyone here. My responsibility is to ensure we have the right framework of legislation and regulation in place to foster the health and well-being of the horse. This last year, in collaboration with many of you here, we have made advances. I look forward to this continuing as we all champion the animal that has and continues to enhance our lives.
Thank you very much, Minister. Some roving mics. So are there any questions for the Minister? I'm not sure how long you can stay, Minister.
Oh, I'm going to stay till about 1:45.
Oh, right, okay.
But I did more questions as well. If I may.
So thank you very much, Minister. I think we'll move on to the next session. And as you are here, you may get some further questions when you've heard from Stuart and from John Bourne, as well as from Jeanette and Lynn. The Minister very nicely introduced the next subject, which is the equestrian sector speaking with one voice. And I'm delighted we've got a double act of Jeanette Allen and Lynn Peterson to come and talk about how the plans for the sector coming together are advancing. So, Jeanette, Lynn, over to you.
Please have control of his after. You are very confident. Push me up. Good morning, everyone. My lords, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Minister, for your kind words about how much work many of us in the sector have been doing. We're going to mention a few of those and some others as we go through our presentation. But firstly, what I wanted to do is, as chair of what was the Equine Sector Council Steering Group and Lynn as chair of the British Horse Industry Confederation, is give a little bit of history, a bit of context as to why we are where we are. Lots of clicks. So, we have the British Horse Industry Confederation, we have the Equine Sector Council for Health and Welfare, and now we have the British Horse Council. Horse expertise for the benefit of the UK's equine animals alongside equine-based industry. It was recognised that many organisations, groups and committees were all working for the betterment of the welfare of horses, ponies and donkeys, and challenged us to pool those resources up as a result. It was attending some major challenges as a sector, not least the horse government bodies from national to welfare and local level, and it became the Equine Health and Welfare Strategy Group, which post-2012 then became the Equine Sector Council for Health and Welfare. Operating alongside but separately the whole time has been the British Horse Industry Confederation. Now we've gone a step further to meet that challenge, and we've merged these two bodies to form one focal point of contact for the horse, the British Horse Council, the voice of the equine sector. In the formation of this newly merged entity, we've started by utilising the representation already in situ on both the Equine Sector Council Steering Group and the British Horse Industry Confederation Board, as these entities effectively had to elect to discontinue themselves, we had to vote ourselves out, and make way for the new merged British Horse Council. This has enabled us to pull together now a new framework that encompasses all of the above subsectors. So the dedicated individuals that have been involved in this project, I would just like to give a shout out to. They've worked extremely hard on top of their very full-time day jobs to achieve this. And can those members of the committee here today please raise your hands so people can see who you are? There you go. Whoever's the nearest to you, feel free to ask them your questions. Question dodging is a theme now, isn't it? Organisations within each subsector will be called on to nominate potential volunteer board members as vacancies arrive in those subsectors. But crucially, as we've said from this platform before, this enterprise is about cooperation, coordination, but mostly consensus. Where the sector disagrees about an issue, the Council will not represent any view, rather leave it to individual organisations to lobby their own views. It's not designed to replace direct access by organisations to government, but to harness the power of speaking with one voice wherever we can. Oh, I'm pressing the wrong direction.
Okay. All right, just a quick review of the environment in which we all exist. Our industry's contribution to GDP stands at £8 billion. 3.7 of that is attributed to the racing industry. 2.7 million riders, drivers and vaulters in the UK, of which 1.3 million are classed as regular riders. Our contribution to exports has a trading value of 400 million. And that's to be on the increase. 53% of our horses are owned for leisure riding, leisure purposes. And I think it's already been mentioned so early this morning, we are recognized throughout the world for excellence in our veterinary research and welfare practices. So if we take a look at what have been the successes and the impact of working together so far. In 2014, the enhanced tripartite agreement came into effect, enabling only those horses of demonstrably higher health status to travel under the TPA without veterinary health certificates. New control measures for contagious equine metritis. 36 days ago, the responsibility for the control of CEM was transferred from the Animal and Plant Health Agency to the equine industry, which signals a very strong partnership between industry and government working together with the Chief Veterinary Officer. The Control of Horses Act came into force in 2015, allowing landowners to deal more quickly and effectively with horses being illegally grazed on land without permission. Export protocol between the UK and China was agreed in 2014 to facilitate the export of horses, primarily thoroughbreds and sport horses, into China. The UK is an active player on this massive and growing market. Remember, 1.3 billion people in China. The Manifesto for the Horse that focused on three main areas: improving health and welfare post-Brexit, improving equestrian trade and government partnership, and increasing participation in equestrian pursuits. Under the leadership of Dame Caroline Spelman, the APBG for the horse has become an active part of parliamentary life. And finally, the new code of practice for welfare of horses, ponies, donkeys, and their hybrids. This was drafted by the equine sector for DEFRA, and it will come into force on the 6th of April. So that's been some of the successes of working together so far. Current initiatives, what's happening now? A new code for licensed premises. There has been a review of licensing for animal establishments. in England, and the British Horse Council are assisting with model conditions and guidance notes for these regulations going before Parliament very, very shortly. Discussion with DEFRA on EU exit issues. We have mentioned that so far. We need to secure this future with minimum difficulty. And we stand ready as the British Horse Council to assist DEFRA in every way possible with regard to these issues surrounding exit. The improved ID in CED, I'll do the same. I'll defer to Stuart, who's going to talk with you shortly. But the Central Equine Database is a tool for passport production, enforcement, and prevention of the spread of disease. But finally, the retrospective microchipping and effective enforcement. The British Horse Council gave coordinated responses to the consultation. We are calling for a more robust equine identification system, and we are pushing for the microchipping of all horses, not just those born after 2009. We want to see far easier enforcement, such as fixed penalty notices being issued for non-compliance.
Okay, just to give a quick word to the future, it'll be quick because I've been shown a sign. What we're looking at the moment is undertaking a legislative review, looking at all EU regulation that touches on the horse or equine-related industry, and seeing what recommendations we might make after day one equivalency has been achieved for the future, potentially enhancing existing regulation more fit for the UK specifically. We will be affected by the animal health regulation coming in 2021, and will assist government in helping keepers understand what different adjustments they might need to make under that regulation. Obviously, we've got the database being launched, and as we've already mentioned, the challenges of EU exit. A big one of those, let's be honest, is the movement of horses across the border from North to South Ireland. So that's a political hot potato, but one that massively affects our world. So it's one we need to be very active in discussing. And finally, what can everyone here do? Well, the slide says we're stronger together. Please join the conversation. We have a full meeting coming up on the 13th of June. We meet as a very large group twice a year, and any equine-focused organisation can join the mailing list by contacting that email address. You find yourself a representative of your organisation and get them to come along to the next meeting and join in the conversation. That's the way to be heard. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's clearly good news. Thanks very much, Lynn and Jeanette. The industry working together to mutual benefit. Any questions for them?
Excellent.
Just hang on. Any thoughts? You're all happy? You're all involved? You can all attend on the 13th of June via your respective organisations, because it's really important that everyone speaks with one voice. The one thing that always confuses governments when there are different segments talking to, ostensibly representing the same sector. It's a really, really difficult thing for government to deal with. So you all happy? Thank you very much. Great. Right, we've touched on the database. So this is the annual update from Stuart Everett, who is going to talk about the Central Equine Database and give his annual update. And he's had some interesting and exciting developments. Stuart, over to you.
Right. Thank you very much. My lords, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Stuart Everett. I'm the CEO of Equine Register, and I can't believe I was invited back after last year. It's fantastic to be here, but we've had a crazy year, and everyone has been incredibly busy. As PIOs, DEFRA, and particularly our team as well, who have been desperately trying to get the database sorted out and up to scratch. Now, this is what I'd like to talk to you about today, what one can expect from it, and but I'd like to also refresh our memories a little bit about what it is, what it does, and why it does it, because that's quite important to understanding how this all works. Now, if you look at the screen there, you can see we are a separate company. We provide national identification, registration and traceability services to the equine industry and government. And they are some of the sectors that we deal with and have applications for and delivery of data to. Now, the CED itself, we provide and manage for DEFRA, and DEFRA is our customer. I'm not going to read stuff off the screen to you, but the last few points there are incredibly important. It's leading the way in the whole of data at the second. It is being developed completely freshly, completely to be flexible and dynamic, and to meet the needs of the 21st century and 21st century technology. You've got sophisticated business rules and policies that deliver conflict resolution, and you've got the ability to start to plug applications, devices, platforms into it as well. As things emerge. 10 years ago, there was no such thing as smartphones. So, why the CED? Last year, that's what I said, why the CED? There it is in black and white. But actually, it's now recognised as well by industry and government as an important tool to underpin exciting new opportunities. So, particularly with the new council that's been set up, there is the ability to start to say, can we do these things? Can we do that? It's important to get behind it. Now, what's the point of it? Initially, the point of it is very much food chain safety, disease management, and help people get reunited with their lost and stolen animals. Now, we'll come on slightly to that as well. Now, there's also, this will be part of the livestock strategy going forward, I understand, but I think John Bourne's going to talk to you more about that in a second. But disease management can only happen if animals are ID'd properly. And this is where it all comes back around in a big circle to owners, to data, to seed, to PIOs, to people updating and keeping the data up to date. And there's going to be some very, very easy, simple tools to enable that to happen. Now, where are we with the Central Equine Database? There's the question. The good news is, as the Minister said, it's operational, it's alive. Already there have been impacts, positive impacts on the Food Standards Agency vets that have been logging into this. They have found things out that are really important to the defence of the food chain. But I thought I'd give you some facts as well. So, we now have some data on that. The 1.2 million records, there may be more. We have a number of things coming in and out. The records change the whole time. In fact, this morning, records have gone up more. More PIOs coming in the door right now. But remember, the system only works properly if everything is on. And that's horses, ponies, donkeys, hybrids, and yes, we even have zebras. And the complete system needs to include derogated records and microchips, as this is really important to welfare and food chain safety. Now, we're lucky in this country to be blessed with 81 passport issuing organisations. And that actually is 68 PIOs that are active and 13 that are inactive. They've either moved over or given up, or actually in some cases been shut down. But the next stat is really important. Only 32% of the horses on there currently are ruled out of the food chain. Now, as owners, you can rule your animal out of the food chain at any point. Vets can rule their animals out of the food chain when they issue controlled drugs. But if you do not want your horse in the food chain, rule it out. But don't just rule it out in the pasture. Tell the PIO. It's really important. You feed the information back. PIO updates the Central Equine Database, and then people can log in and see what's going on. The next stat is really important. Only 47% of horses have a microchip recorded. Now, this can be for several reasons. But actually, a really important reason is that you may have had a microchip put into the passport. You may have gone out and microchipped the horse legally and for the right reasons. But you haven't notified the PIO. Unless you notify the PIO that's happened, you cannot go to the central records. And that's really important because you will not get reunited with your lost or stolen animal. So, if we look at something everyone's been vying for, they've wanted us to do for ages, it's the Equine Register Public Chip Check. Now, this was asked, requested that we do this by DEFRA and by the sector itself. So, essentially, this will be on our website and it will be going live very, very shortly, probably next few weeks. You will go to the public chip chat and you will see it on the homepage of the website. It's incredibly easy to use. You enter a microchip number at the top and you will receive basic information about the animal. There is also, very importantly, in the top right hand corner, a button that says no microchip question mark. This will help. If you want it, this will have information about how do I get a microchip into my horse, how do I do this, how do I register it, who do I do it with. This is where to get behind things. We can start to channel people into talking to their vets, talking to everybody else. Now, there's also work with the sector that's going on, but more importantly, it's free, and they've demanded, everyone demanded it's free, and it's the right thing, it's free. It's free for everybody to use this, and it's free to get behind it. It gives public access to credible data. People have heard about the CVD, but actually the CVD itself, when it was originally tendered, was a closed system. It's a closed system for food standards registrars, for local authority trading standards officials, for DEFRA and involved, for the PIOs themselves. It doesn't allow public access. This is what this allows, and it allows the data to be kept up to date and gives people confidence in the data. Now, if we look at what you can get from the chip check, you will notice none of the information that comes back on these reports is personal data. This is unbelievably important because it is therefore data protection regulation and GDPR compliant. But it does give you a chance to start to have a look at comparing documents in real time. And everything is funneled back through the PIO. If you have any issues, any questions, anything, there's the PIO information. Talk to the PIO. They will go through the checks and balances they need to do. Vets can see food chain status in the field. That's been an incredibly important thing to go on. And if you're being sold an animal and you're issued documents, you can do a basic check against them. So you'll notice this record has no alerts. There's a big blue 0 there. So let's look at one with some alerts. Now, there are 2 alerts on this record, and what we'll have a look at now is some data that goes with the alerts. One of the things that we can get off the database is the fact the horse is dead. This is really important because there has been evidence of microchips and documents being moved around from dead animals. Recycling of this cannot happen. It's incredible. It's bad for all manner of reasons. This is a basic check and balance against it. There are also some other alerts that we can put on there with the help of owners. Animal reporting missing. There's the big one. My animal's gone. How on earth are you going to find this again? Now you can get an alert up from it. If you log into owner, we clear your data, we check it. My documents are missing. Brilliant one. There we are. The documents that you've got in your hand are either stolen or they're wrong. Passport held with keeper. You'll notice there are red and amber there. These are different because passport held with keeper isn't the end of the world, but it's a good note. We found out that sometimes horses get sold from yards that aren't supposed to be sold from yards. And if the documents are with them, it's just a caveat emptor, buyer beware. There are multiple documents associated with this horse. This is something that has happened already with the Food Standards Agency. In some documents it's in the food chain, in some documents it's out the food chain. Immediately, that makes a big difference to things. So, what can you do if you can't find your microchip? Well, the first thing we say is, have a look and see if you've typed the number in correctly, and have another go. But if not, check that it's registered with the PIO, as I said at the beginning. So, when will the chip checker be ready? I estimate probably then. But we're running some last checks on it right now, and that will be the start of a process that grows and grows. That's pretty much it. I've had my 1-minute sign. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Good progress being made. We're going to take our next paper from John Bourne from DEFRA, looking at livestock traceability, and then there'll be a question time. So, John, if you'd like to come up and give your paper on livestock traceability.
Am I coming over there?
Yeah, you come over here.
Horses matter. You don't need me to tell you that, and you've heard from the previous speakers how they matter to government, how they matter to the economy, and how they matter to individuals. I'm going to be speaking slightly more around sort of the broader picture here, and surprise you all by talking not entirely around horses, which will probably make me unpopular. But I know that horses really do matter to individuals. My mother is 84. She's ridden a horse nearly every day of her life and spent the last 25 years riding the same horse. Very sadly, that relationship came to an end in January, so you can imagine she's feeling fairly bereft. And I always think that probably much more bereft than if it had been me who'd been put down in January. And horses have sort of, in government, have interesting characteristics. They have characteristics that are quite linked to cats and dogs, and they have characteristics that are quite linked to sort of other larger animals in the farming community. And I'm going to be talking slightly more about the latter for the next few minutes. First of all, where are we now? We have, as you just heard, the fourth one, but we've got three main traceability and ID systems. The one on cattle was first designed in about 1995 or thereabouts, and was a reaction to the BSE crisis. It's been continuously developed from then, and it's not all paper-based now as it was to start with. You can identify, as many of you will know, your cattle online or order a passport. However, underlying it is still quite a clunky system. There are a lot of people employed in Workington, for example, who receive passports from slaughterhouses, have to load each number up manually onto a computer system, and it still runs off a green screen computer system. Some of you may remember those and probably haven't seen one for a long time. But it produces a very good service for farmers. It has a fantastic telephone helpline, and it's very user-friendly from that point of view, but it can't be said to be the most efficient. The one for pigs is owned and delivered by AHDB, the levy board. It was originally designed when there was an independent pig levy board, and they did it independently of government. It might not totally surprise you to know that that system is also very popular with its users, because it was sort of designed partly by the users, or people who represented them. But it doesn't do individual animals, it does batches. The one on the bottom left, sheep and goats, was designed in response to the EU's regulations on electronic ID, the first species to have compulsory electronic ID. I think many people would think it was a pity they didn't start with cattle, but it was partly a response to the problems that we had with foot and mouth disease in 2000. We found it very hard to know where our sheep were. When we put it together, it meets the minimum legal requirements. It's probably fair to say that it only just meets them, and it's probably fair to say it was designed to be the least cost means of meeting them. It probably isn't entirely a surprise then that from the user point of view, they feel it doesn't do much for them. And it's not very popular. And in this context, I think I should also say that from our point of view in disease control, it's not perfect for us either. And we'll sort of come back to that theme in a minute around sort of who designs these systems and what are the drivers behind them. You've now got, as you've just heard from Stuart, a shiny new system which has been designed with rather different principles and much more input from users. And I hope, as we'll come to in a minute, that that will prove better for you as users, as well as delivering what we need and meeting legal requirements. Many of you probably have several of those species, and if you do, you will know that you have to interact with those 4 different systems. It would be easier for those of you who do have several species if you only had one system to interact with. In addition, on the cattle front, the EU regulations are changing, and by summer 2019, we are supposed to have a system that is enabled for EID. We don't actually have to use it at that point, but it should be in due course. So that's where we are now. I hope that we have learned some of the lessons of the last 20, 30 years. So we are trying to approach the next stage in a slightly different way. Simon Hall, who leads the project, has put together a large group of people, the Traceability Design User Group, chaired by John Cross, and Jeanette and Jan sit on that. And that's quite an interesting point. I don't think at any time in the past that you would have had equine representatives when talking about livestock identification in DEFRA. And we're trying to do this differently. We're trying to learn the lessons from projects more broadly. You can either look at this as a project to put a new IT system in place, or you can say, you can do what's known as a benefits-driven project. How do I maximise the benefits that I get out of what I do? And so my background is on projects, and that's what we've tried to do, for example, on HS2 and similar projects. So we put a group together and said, what is it that you would like to see out of an ID system? We know what we need to see as government in terms of disease control. We know what the regulations say, but what can it do for you? And I think that group's been meeting for a year now and has had a huge impact on what this system might in the future look like. It is very much co-creation rather than government coming up with an answer, consulting you, taking some account of what you say, and then going ahead largely with what it had first designed because you're too far down the road to do a radical change. So we very much tried to make sure that your views are in here on the ground floor. And as I say, the equine sector has been hugely influential in that. And Tim's been involved as well. This is about data, as Stuart said. You, in a sense, are leading this with your CED because you have the data now, and you can start to think about how you might use it. There are issues of data, and what we want from this livestock ID is a system which owns good quality data on all livestock. So you actually have a fairly shiny new example anyhow, so you're going to be sort of at the end of the queue here because in a sense you're not the one where the pressures are greatest, but that's quite good news because you can learn from everyone else too and from your own experiences with the CED. But there will be, so you have good quality data, government will use it for the purposes it needs, you and the other sectors can use it for the purposes you need. And the sort of areas where it's really helpful, and you will discover what you can use it for, and you will have ideas that we will not have, but clearly things around genetics, not so much in your world, productivity, but standards, innovation, integration of, in the livestock world, of supply chains, etc., is really important. I imagine that in your world it would largely be around genetics and performance and things are going to be more important than other things, but I'm not the expert on this. The really important point is how do we enable you to use the data rather than say we just want data from you. That gives you much more of a buy-in to what we're doing. And so I hope that this will be a very different way of doing livestock identification, and whichever sector you're involved in, and you may well be involved in more than one, it will be of benefit to you as well as to us. Because one of the clear messages back, particularly from the sheep and goat world, is you have this system, we have to give you data, it's no use to us, it's a real pain in the neck. And we quite want to change that dynamic and make sure that actually you are the ones who want to use this data. You're the ones who actually find this system beneficial. We will definitely well in disease outbreaks, but hopefully those will be few and far between. So that's sort of my message I really wanted to get across. And I think that it's, the CED is already a long way down that road. And as I say, you may say, why are we putting a new database in place when you've just got a shiny new one? it's fair to say the equine world is not the driver for having a single all-species database, but clearly, which is why you won't be the first ones to go on it, but once we have one, it makes sense to use that single platform, but that's some years down the road. Next steps, because I probably ran out of time, some of you may have read or heard what the Secretary of State said at the NFU conference. We need still to work on sort of the target operating model. We need to if they want to know why it's not in the food chain, I suspect that may get more complicated in terms of data, etc. So I think I sort of wouldn't want to guess at an answer. Keith, I never run away from you.
I mean, speaking as someone involved in the traceability design user group, I think there has been the concern that as far as DEFRA initially was concerned, it was only, if you like, to the farm gate. After that was somebody else's problem. I think now that there is a realisation it's all the way through to the slaughterhouse and stuff like that, because that's really, really important. Miles, and then in the front.
Miles Williamson, Noble Federation of Farriers Associations. Could I ask to drill down a little bit into that 1.2 million records figure? Does it include those horses which are shown as having died? Does it include those which are not shown as having died but which are aged over 50? And does it include multiple records for any animal that's been registered with 2 PIOs? The basic question is, how many live horses, equides, are there in the country?
Okay, there are about, there's about 1.2 million. We haven't got an exact number on it because it's changing the whole time, but it's about 1.2 million live. There's also people reported dead horses, and they'll keep that information. I think it's for up to 2 years, and then that is filed somewhere else. And on the aged horses, what is it, 30, is it 35? I think it's over 35, they're moved as well. I'm not sure that's a policy thing, and you need to clear that with DEFRA when they get moved out as a kind of just being too old. But the important thing about the CED now is that it is so much more accurate, and there is so much more ability to actually trace the life of a horse rather than just guess. Oh, it's 35, probably dead. That's not really that helpful to people. So there is the opportunity to do this now. The data is becoming very, very clean. The access is available. It's up to you guys to work out what you need to do and talk to DEFRA about it.
And generically, one of the issues whenever you put in a new data system is the rules you put about the data that the old data you import into it, which will always have issues and problems, because actually that's one of the reasons you're putting a new data system in place. So the answer is there was quite a lot of bad quality data, I think the Minister said in his speech. We have done our best to cleanse that, which is one reason it's taken time. If you're asking me, can I be absolutely sure that there are no elements of bad quality data in there, I think that's hugely unlikely.
Yep.
There will be some. It will be much better than it was. And as this system then goes over time, and generations of horses go through it, it will self-cleanse as well, because the rules and the system are now tighter.
So the 1.2 million is about right.
Absolutely. Yes, this has been one of the things. I mean, on Old Ned, I think the data was up to 1.5 million, but tons of those, that's gone. This is very, very much more accurate and up to date. But again, it is only as accurate as the data the PIO supplies.
Final question there. Otherwise, we're running out of time, I'm afraid.
Hi, Dave Jones. I'm the National Lead for Policing for Wildlife Crime and Rural Affairs. Support what you're doing. I've just one question. How involved are we in that from a livestock theft point of view? We obviously, from our side, have lots of experience of tracing things. And if there isn't, we would like to offer some of that.
I guess if you're asking how involved you are, the answer is not enough, almost by definition, or you wouldn't have asked the question. So, thank you. I'll take that back.
It's just, if I may add one little thing to that, I believe that DEFRA have been asked by some body of police, but I'm not sure which body, if they can get access. There's the public chip checker up there, which of course part of this is to do that, and then it's just about having a chat to them, because now the system's there, and it would be fantastic. It makes complete sense, doesn't it? So, yeah.
Good. Well, apologies for those of you who put your hands up, but we've run out of time, which is always a good sign. So thank you very much, Stuart and John. Really good session.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, moving on the general theme of the horse industry in a changing world, we're now going to have a panel discussion, and I'm delighted that we have Dame Caroline Spelman here, who has a very distinguished parliamentary history, not least as Secretary of State for DEFRA, but she's here essentially as the All-Party Parliamentary Group Chair for the horse, and she will now chair this next session. So Dame Caroline, please come to the stage. Thank you.
Right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Lovely to be here with you. Very nice to see Lord Gardner with us. I've come hot foot from the House of Commons, where we've just had DEFRA questions, and Lord Gardner will be delighted when he reads the Hansard tomorrow to find that I've just paid him tribute for helping bring off a quite remarkable achievement of a way to get better broadband and mobile coverage in rural areas. So well done him. So we're here to have a panel which is going to be a little bit like question time. And I must say I've been relishing this, having been on the other end of being a panellist many, many times. This morning I am essentially David Dimbleby for you, minus, of course, the eye-catching necktie. But I hope you will very much enjoy the panel. You'll take the opportunity to engage with it. It is being live streamed because we think that good advice and material will come from the panel that people beyond this room will be able to appreciate and benefit from. The strength and depth of the knowledge that we have amongst the panellists, which will mean that we have a really productive session today. So I'm going to introduce the panellists one by one. So in alphabetical order. Carol Andrews is with us. She is the owner of Wimbledon Village Stables. And Carol has owned and run that stables, which is a BHS-approved riding school in Liveryard, for 37 years. She has 25 horses and 10 full-time staff. She tells me that she has competed in the past, but that her competitive riding days are beyond her. You know, I never really believe that. I restarted 3 years ago. Never say never. She's a very successful businesswoman, and she's most proud of the award that she achieved from the London Borough of Merton for going the extra mile. That's what it's called, an award that reflected her commitment to her clients as well as her community, because she has fundraised over £1 million in total for local and national charities. That's really quite remarkable, Carol. Well done. She's a firm believer, too, that all riders benefit from a fit, flexible body. What a challenge. She set up Equisize, a business that runs alongside the stables and focuses on rider fitness with the use of a horse simulator and exercise gym. Really very interesting. And then my next panellist is Nick Gauntlet, who's just flown in from Dubai. Very good effort. And goodness, the plane was on time. He's a fellow of the British Horse Society, a British eventing master coach, and a UKCC Level 3 coach in show jumping and eventing. Nick has produced a number of event horses to the 4-star level. His many students compete from grassroots to international championship level, and he's a passionate supporter of the British breeding industry and the representatives here. This has led him to breed the sports horse, the Champion Stallion Party Trick by Chilly Morning, who is standing at stud alongside his competition career. Well done, Nick. Our third panellist is Victoria Highfield. Vicky's background strongly influenced by the horsey world. She's ridden from a young age, and she actually studied for a career in veterinary medicine. But after achieving her F-Cert, Vicky changed career paths, undertaking a BSc in equine sports science and achieving a first-class honours. Well done. She used that industry experience to launch online for equine in 2011, the aim of providing riders with an educative retail platform that she felt was lacking. So the initial business was solely online, but she has a very strong local market as well. And recently, she's implemented a plan to secure online for equine's position in the global market and to launch sister brands. And our fourth panellist is Emma Williams. She's the Director of Fundraising at World Horse Welfare. Emma's worked in the charity for 14 years across all areas of fundraising. She's got extensive experience of working closely with volunteers. Many of you perhaps may be volunteering. And she's responsible for fundraising compliance, and most recently has been working with other equestrian charities and organisations to help find a compliant and practical approach to the forthcoming General Data Protection Regulation, which just might be a question in due course. She's been lucky enough to be around horses all her life, and she enjoys most spending time with the 2 ponies she has rehomed from equine charities. Ladies and gentlemen, that is our panel. So our first question, I think, is going to be from Philip Baker from Onley Grounds Equestrian Complex. This is going to be about business rates.
Hello, yes, I'm putting it forwards from Philip, who's put it through the Facebook. His question is, business rates are the single biggest threat to the development of equestrianism in this country. Not only are they a threat to schools, our future national and international Olympic team will suffer from regression in size of competent facilities in this country if we don't start to push for change. Could the panel please explain how we can work to achieve a change in the rating system?
Right, well, thank you. That's Beth Maloney, who, she did let me know, actually. She was going to put Philip's question. She's a forum committee member. Now, this is a rich subject, difficult subject with lots of angles, but I think let's start by asking Nick, would you like to have your first crack at this question, particularly from the point of view of elite sport?
Yeah, I think from my point of view, it's quite topical. We recently had our business rate review, which was sort of a very significant hike. And to be honest, we got quite a shock. We were quite worried about this when it first came in. And we went through the procedure, we questioned this. We sort of felt that we were being a little bit roaded and bullied, and by chance we found a gentleman that was actually gamekeeper turned poacher, if you like, that was now working for the other side and has come in and as you said in the introduction, with Party Trick My Stallion, I now qualify for stud relief, which the people who'd come around and had a look around didn't say about, because I have other riders based with me. They've now quite legally, quite ethically split the property business, because it's 2 separate businesses, 3 separate businesses really. And he's come back to us and said, actually, I think you're going to end up paying nothing at all, which is massive difference. And I think really my point is that you've got to challenge this. You've got to ask if you know, we had a new person come in, her interpretation of the rules was very different from the previous people, and actually, from my point of view, it's actually going to help me in the end. But it really was quite a shock when the initial bill came through and was going to be a huge hike. And as I say, that's very recently happened to us. So.
Well, there's no doubt there are a lot of anomalies in the calculation of people's business rates, and the British Horse Society have done a huge amount of work on this, which has been very helpful for me as chair of the group to take directly to the Treasury, that is well aware, let me tell you, that the horse sector has been very badly affected by the recent rate revaluation. So I think this is one aspect which is very concerning, and it results in all sorts of perverse incentives. But this is an ongoing piece of work, so I think what we glean from today we can take back to the group and keep pushing for a fair system of calculating what a business should pay. But I'm going to go next to Vicky to talk about how this impacts her business and what experience she might have had with this.
So obviously I'm from a retail sector, so slightly different tangent, although I have got colleagues who are suffering. The main thing I'd say is that people have to be prepared to challenge. A small business often just take what they're told and run with it. Often they don't necessarily have the staff or the time to really look into why they're being charged, what they're being charged. And often the consensus, I think it's some confidence to actually challenge what they're being told. We actually have affected it ourselves from a business rate perspective, and we've actually challenged it with our local council. Our business premises were actually misvalued. But it's having that confidence to take that forward and say, actually, no, this isn't right. You've completely misvalued this, let's get you back in to have a look. But talking, I've got colleagues who are in the sector, who are affected, unfortunately, and I feel a lot of it has to come down to diversification of what they're actually
to try and raise extra funds outside of the equestrian business
they run. And again, things like utilising the school when it would otherwise be quiet for RDA groups, that kind of thing. I think if people are affected and they have challenged and they haven't got a positive outcome, then that diversification is another way of generating some more revenue into the business.
That's really helpful, because really everybody that appealing the decision, if you, is very, very important. This is the advice that comes from the BHS. Their research showed that some equestrian businesses are facing increases of over 350%, which is incredible. Nobody's profits went up by that much. Of course, the problem with the tax is that it's a property-based tax, and property has increased huge value, especially in certain parts that businesses work. We discovered to this that the Valuation Office Agency were yoking together equestrian facilities of very, very different structure. So if you put a top-notch livery stable alongside a small little local riding stable, their capacity for income is different, the challenges they face is very different, but they're actually just lumped in one category by the Valuation Office Agency. And this is, even the Treasury can see that there is a problem with the way this is being approached. So the Chancellor has said he's going to change the rating system. What to do is change in such a way that it's fair. But now I just want to come back to you've the whole business.
Lucky, but you know, I did see throughout the country really.
Yeah, and that sort of campaigning as a group is very, very effective. When we went to see the Chancellor, he explained that actually the campaign by the British Horse Society and the sheer number of you who actually wrote to your members of Parliament to talk about the unfairness of these way above inflation increases had really had an impact. So if you haven't yet written to your Member of Parliament and you are badly affected, that's another thing you can do, but please don't forget that important thing about appealing the decision if you feel it's wrong. Now, I want to come back to horse welfare. We don't want this business rate revaluation to have an impact on horse welfare, but I'm sure the Horse Welfare Charity has a view.
Well, first of all, just really to echo what you've already said, with reference to lobbying the government, that's really the only way to effect a change in the rates. So we're really grateful to the British Horse Society and to the Chair for
effort into that, and we just need to continue with that advocacy work. With reference to rates for charities, charities can apply, and also
amateur sport associations, for a reduction of around about 80% in rates. If you're a non-profit organisation, you might get some discretionary relief, but that's very much down to local councils, so it is worth sort of keeping in touch with that. I know some establishments haven't had a huge amount of success with that, but I think the message really is to sort of keep on trying. I guess with reference to horse welfare, what we don't want to see is sort of businesses going out of business, because then you might be in a position where owners need to find somewhere else for their horse to go. We all know that as part of the economic crisis, we've seen that sort of rise in horse welfare cases, people being unable to afford to look after their equine. So there could be a knock-on effect if people can't afford to have their horse in the yard.
I think that it's helpful if you do know of an equine establishment, particularly a riding school, for whom the rating revaluation was sort of like the last straw, because it came on top of other costs to their business, the rise in the rates of pay, the requirement to pay more, the cost of implementing
tighter health and safety regulations, and then on top of all that, this rating reevaluation. If you know that businesses are going to the wall because this is the last straw, please let the BHS know, because we're keeping these case studies as hard evidence of the impact. And I think it's also important, Vicky touched on this point, that there is a tricky dimension within what's proposed regarding riding for the disabled. Something, a subject very close to your patron's heart, I know that. And for whatever reason that I profess I don't understand, perhaps Lord Gardner could help within government on this. The rate relief for, so the discount for stables on rates regarding provision of riding for the disabled facilities, they have to be 100% facilities that are for riding for the disabled. But this, of course, is not the way that riding for the disabled works. In practice, anyone who's run a riding stable or goes to a riding stable will know that riding for the disabled is often offered midweek and off-peak as regards the stables, when they have time to provide this amazing service to very vulnerable people who benefit hugely from being able to do it. So designated facilities that are 100% riding for the disabled are few and far between, but also this kind of change in the eligibility is in danger of depriving a number of people from the riding for the disabled facilities in their locality. So if you could possibly take that one back for us. It's a bit of a cheek, isn't it, for a member of Parliament? I'll be a parliamentarian from the brief, but I'm quite sure that David Dimbleby would not hold back if he was given the opportunity. So I think we've had a good thrash around that topic, if that's okay. We'll move on to our second topic, if that's okay. And I believe we're going to have a question from Caris Samuels, if Caris would like to indicate where she is. Yeah, the microphone will come to you.
So it's a two-part question. How can organisations and businesses within the sector be best placed to deal with the general data protection regulations which come into force in May? And the second part, what role could better communications within the equine sector play to help small equine businesses?
Right. I did say that we might get the general data protection question. I had just a hint we might. And we're very fortunate to have Emma with us because they are horse welfare really looking into implications of this. So if you'd like to give us the benefit of your wisdom on this subject, we'd be very grateful.
Thank you. Well, there are a lot of people professing to be experts out there, and I'm certainly not one of them, but I think I'll just give you a brief overview of the General Data Protection Regulation, which is coming into force on the 25th of May. So it's not long now, so if you haven't started work, then you really should on it. The reason it's coming into force is because the existing regulation is around about 20 years old, and it's not really fit for purpose in the digital society that we live today. And the aim is very much about giving individuals more control over their personal data. And personal data is anything which could identify a living individual. So that could be an online indicator, or it could be a photograph, which I think is what a lot of people won't always consider, that it's not just about names and addresses, it can be a photograph. So it's really important to work together on this. So I know you can potentially look for help from NUC or BETA, and as a number of equestrian charities have been working together, and we've pulled together a mini forum on the General Data Protection Regulation and been looking at the various issues which are important to us within that and pooling our resources, which again has been hugely helpful. You really mustn't bury your head in the sand on this issue, because the fines for non-compliance are huge. It's around about £18 million. So that's a lot of money. You really must sort of take action now. So to help you with some of those steps, I would recommend the first thing that you do is to audit your data. So you need to understand what you're collecting, why you're collecting it, and how you're collecting it, and then take that further into looking at what you're processing and storing and how you're sharing that data, and then go and document those decisions so you've got an audit trail. In addition, you'll probably want to update your privacy statement, because a lot of the messaging coming out from the Information Commissioner's Office is about you need to be more specific and granular about how you are treating personal data. And the privacy statement is a key place to put that. You might also want to use the results available on the Information Commissioner Office website, where you can do a self-audit, and that's something that we'll be looking at doing in the next couple of weeks. Now we're quite a way down the line with our GDPR plans. In addition, you should really look at where you might be working with suppliers and partners, where you could be sharing data. Are your agreements fit for purpose? Are they compliant? If not, you might want to consider adding in a separate data processing agreement to that, which is compliant with GDPR. And I think the third and probably most poignant point is about staff training. Your staff need to understand about the data regulations and any volunteers that might handle data. We're currently rolling out online training for our staff to ensure that they are aware and providing support for them with that. Because one of the biggest threats to an organisation is still a data breach, so you really need to review your policy to understand how to report if you do have a data breach. You need to be able or need to make an assessment based on the information on the Information Commissioner's Office website as to whether it is a breach. And then that breach would need to be reported within 72 hours. But I did want to stress that it's not all sort of doom and gloom and an awful lot of administration, but there is a lot of administration. It does give us an opportunity to really build those relationships with supporters, to build relationships with customers and clients, and to help to engender more trust and loyalty.
Well, I thought that came quite close to being a seminar on the general data protection regulations, but you know what? It's so valuable and actually completely, I think, underlines the value of live streaming this panel because, in a sense, you know, in a nutshell, that is what an awful lot of people need to know what you need to do. And very well explained and well put together. And I saw a lot of people nodding, some people looking alarmed. But actually, really incredibly valuable to share that information in this audience and beyond. I think we should also hear from practitioners that are trying to get to grips with what it means for them. And Carol has volunteered to tell us how she's going about it. That would be good.
Well, it was quite overwhelming when we first heard about it. So. But necessary. Everybody has a right to have their data protected, so it is a necessary thing to do. What we did in our business is we hold people's details obviously on file, including their card details for their payments. So way back in when it first started to appear, like November time, we moved all our clients' details onto a GDPR compliant database. And now I've got a fantastic girl in the office, Claire, and she is very computer savvy, as am I. You know, I can do my website, I can do my Ocado order in 5 minutes, but getting my head around this database and Claire's, I mean, my head nearly exploded, really, because what you had to learn to put everyone's details on and make sure it was all done properly, it was quite immense. So it is possible and it is achievable to be compliant, but it is going to involve costs. You know, there was at least a week of 3 of us like getting to grips with this this website, you know, and a lot of other equestrian businesses, small ones, are going to struggle with finding people. You know, luckily I have knowledge, and so does Claire in the office, but there'll be a lot of businesses who don't have that knowledge, and it is a little bit overwhelming. I hope we can find a way to work to help these businesses to get through these challenges, you know, because you know, so with the database, once you've got it there, you know, you can do everything with it. I mean, it analyses all your data, it sends out emails, it tracks performance and everything. So it is absolutely brilliant, but getting there was tricky.
I think it's very interesting, your business model, which I found absolutely fascinating, that you have a riding stables, which is actually like a membership organisation. I think it's I think it's a very interesting way forward for the sustainability of riding schools, by the way, to approach it that way. But the second that you're doing that, you have to take extra care of managing your members' data and managing the relationship between yourself and your members. And I know as a Member of Parliament and a data protection officer, you need to be extremely careful with it. And it was interesting because Emma touched on photos. Well, of course, in the horsey world, we take loads of photos. We take photos of ourselves riding, we take photos of other people riding, we send them to each other. But actually, there are quite controls about the use of those photos and making yourself aware of, if you use them commercially, have you got permission of the people who appear in the photograph to do that? And could you prove that? Is actually, you know, one more little complexity, but I mean, that's the world we live in today. And, you know, this is designed to help everyone make sure that they are protected against not understanding what it is that they need to do. I'd like to also ask Vicky to chip in on this question. I'm sure she's got a view too.
Well, really echoing the previous panellists' comments, really. I think the main feedback that I've had when I've spoken to other retailers in our sector, and also to colleagues who own riding schools, riding centres, it doesn't affect us. And I think, unfortunately, and from a consumer perspective, there's been a big drive from the BBC to inform people, this is what's coming into effect, you need to be aware of it. And I feel that there's some people in the industry at the moment who are a little bit complacent. It doesn't affect them, but in reality, the consumer are going to determine how we have to change our business models. As a business, we've started with discussing with staff members how we need to adjust how we collect data, how we store data. Slightly on a different aspect, we're affected differently from an e-commerce perspective. It's completely going to change the online market and how we market to our customers and remarket. And at the moment, there's a little bit of a lack of clarity with how that's going to sit. So we're preparing as best as we can with the information we have available. From a small business point of view, I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of experts who are looking to make a lot of money out of small business. And unfortunately, I think there are a few individuals who are going to be caught out. One bit of advice that I would firmly suggest people follow is to speak to the organisations and say we need assistance. I spoke to Claire at Beta and said, look, retailers would really like some information put forward to help us. So everybody has a basic guidance of where we need to be going, what we need to be adhering to that's specific to our business. Everybody can read the legislation, but it's not specific to each and every individual business. So I think it's down to us to put the pressure that we need the information and request it from our supporting bodies.
Well, that's very helpful indeed, and you've reinforced why it's so important. And actually, I did do one thing, which as chair of the all-party parliamentary group for the horse, I put down a written question from the part that the government would give on how to work with this directive. And I think it was Emma who touched on what the Information Commissioner's Office can do to help you, and that's very important. And I learned from the answer to this written question that the Information Commissioner's Office has launched a dedicated helpline service for smaller organisations and updated its SME toolkit to reflect the requirements of this directive in a simplified 12-step preparation guidance. There's a slight contradiction there, but anyway, we'll only know by using the toolkit that's available how that can really assist you and make it easier for you. So I just repeat that. If you go onto the website for the Commissioner, the Information Commissioners, you should be able to access that SME toolkit, and also there's tailored advice for charities as well. So hopefully out of this session too, you're able to take away some things that give you a bit of confidence that we can sort it. We can do it. Okay, good. Well, shall we move on to our third question? Another subject that comes up regularly and may even just produce a groan in the audience about health and safety. Now, this question, I believe, is going to be raised by Jane Skepper. If Jane would just like to indicate where she's sitting. Here we go. The microphone will come to you.
Thank you very much. With so many restrictions through health and safety legislation, are we making things more dangerous for our children and employees who no longer get the same chance to experience danger, and so just assume that there will be no accident and are then totally unprepared when the unexpected happens? Running a yard is a time-consuming role. Any advice on the most effective way to find out and stay up to date with the ongoing challenges of health and safety and changes, safeguarding and other legislation would be great.
Right, thank you. That is, it's a good question, well put. And I think we'll start with from the riding school perspective, because these are the establishments that face, I think, some of the biggest challenges. So, Carol, if you'd like to give us your thoughts on this question.
Well, health and safety is necessary, I think. And when I think to when I learnt to ride as a child, I mean, I used to be falling off with a broken girth, the pony would fall over an unsafe jump, you know, I'd get bucked off the one that was just backed that I shouldn't have been riding at all. And I used to remember kind of going home, like, in absolute agony, too frightened to tell my mum what had happened, because she'd stopped me riding. So I'd say, oh, everything was fine, I had a lovely day, and I'd go and sort of sit down and recover. So, you know, it is necessary, and health and safety, you know, you do get a lot of help from various organisations can help you to set it up. It does involve a lot of, you know, forms to fill in. It makes you really examine your business and how you run it, because at the end of the day, you want peace of mind running a business, that no one's going to hurt themselves at your business. So it is, you know, like I said, it takes time, and some things you're just not aware of. I mean, and prior to having my fire risk assessment, I literally thought that a few scatterings of fire extinguishers around the yard was all I needed. That was what we were told before. When the man came in to assess us, I literally couldn't believe what he was telling me I needed doing. And I was on the phone to my builder while he was there, and I said, you've got to come tomorrow and start this work, which he did. And within 2 weeks, you know, he had relined ceilings, put doors in and everything. But the peace of mind I felt after having that done, you know, was just extraordinary. You know, you have to do it. But that all comes with a cost. Obviously, and every business should have a contingency built in to allow for these extra costs. And the time it takes. And as an example, Caroline, my sister-in-law, who we run the stables together, she had to recently spend a day going through with our HR company all our, you know, health and safety documents for the annual check. And I said to Caroline, I said, what was more fun, your day health and safety officer or having your bunion done? She said, having a bunion done. But it's necessary.
Yeah, that's very helpful, and it does underline, you know, how important it is. And if I could just underline the safeguarding aspect to the question, because, you know, the seriousness of this is not to be underestimated, especially for equine establishments that are working with children. You know, there are now much more rigorous standards in place to safeguard the children in their care. And it's really, really important that that is followed. This whole area has come under a lot more scrutiny, quite rightly, for all the reasons you know, of abuse that children have suffered. And it's tough on riding schools and other out-of-school settings that care for children, but I think more pressure is going to be applied in that area too. Now, Nick, you train youngsters, you have youngsters working with you. I'm sure you've got some views on this question.
I do, yeah. And I'm very quickly going to tell you a little story about one of my experiences, which I think highlights the problem completely. A couple of years ago, we were competing at Blenheim Horse Trials, and I was asked by the organisers if I'd take a group of school children from the middle of Oxford on a course walk. This was on the Thursday, so there was nobody jumping a single cross-country fence. There was a lot of dressage going around. My brief was they won't really know very much about horses, and that was an understatement. We started with one-end kicks, one-end bites, and had to explain which one it was. It sort of was going downhill from there, and I was working hard to get some enthusiasm about these solid fences that we had to jump and how fast we had to gallop. Surely that's got to be fun. How fast we gallop at these fences. I was struggling. We came to the water jump at Blenheim, and as a lot of you know, there's a great big expanse of water. Suddenly 30 or 40 kids' faces lit up, and the teacher looks round and said, where's the lifeguard? And wouldn't let any of these children cross the water. Every single child had welly boots on. The water was not 30 centimetres deep at all. I'm sure one of them would have got a wet foot, but they'd have loved it. That would have made their day, and it was so sad and so difficult for me to carry the walk on. And so I went away afterwards to try and find out if this is really what health and safety is, and I was told in no uncertain terms that no, it's not. This is people's interpretation of the rules. We interpret things very badly. I think sometimes things are written quite vaguely in order to allow you to interpret them badly as well. But I do feel in going around coaching, I work with a lot of pony clubs, and I do think that we're starting to go around full circle practical again. As you know, I can remember going up jumping when I was when I was a little bit younger with hands above my head and doing things that we now only see the police do at Olympia. We need to get back to those days, because exactly, children actually need to find a seat, exactly that. And it really shows the kids that have grown up perhaps galloping around the countryside having fun that you come to teach. You know, I tend to ask children how old they are, and now when you see them ride, because there's such a diversity in how well children sit on a horse, and it's always the ones that have just got out and got on and had fun ride so much better and so much more naturally than the ones that have had people being precious with them, actually. The second part to the question, how do you prepare for the health and safety in the yard at home? I think we're very lucky that we get a lot of children write to us to come on work experience with us. The great thing about that is every time somebody wants to come to the yard, we get a headmaster or somebody sent from the school or the college or wherever it is to come and look through our health and safety policy, to come and check things. My wife Amanda, luckily I passed that on to her to deal with that tour, but that keeps us very up to date, because they'd say, well, this is good, this isn't good enough, you need to do this, you need to do that. So it's actually a very, very easy way of keeping up to date. And also from an interview, I think it's nice to give some back. We were all that age once, and we needed to go on work experience, so it works every which way round.
Your anecdotes are very, very good, Nick, and it brings it all alive. And it's made me realise that when my daughter does say, now I'm going to take away your stirrups, Mum, it'll be good for you. She's getting the balance right there. So, Vicky, would you like to tell us how this looks from your point of view?
So really echoing facts, I mean, we're in a similar position. We take on work experience students. The majority of the students we take on are from college or from a general higher education point of view. And we tend to have the health and safety officer who comes every time we take on a new student, which usually leads to a rolling of the eyes and, oh, we've got another half a day spending with this lovely gentleman who's going to critique all manner of our business. But it's really valuable. It's free advice that's there for us to readily take on board. So from a work experience point of view, I completely agree. You're giving something back, but also you're getting that benefit of that advice, that critique of your policies to ensure that you are compliant. And looking back from my day I used to teach, I think the problem is with health and safety. It's not health and safety that's the problem, it's the misinterpretation of the legislation that's out there. And unfortunately, the fear due to the culture that we live in now, people are commonly saying, I'm going to sue, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And that does leave you with fear. If you're going to say to a small child, right, come on, this is what we're going to do today, it's the repercussions that can have on you as an individual, you as a business. So yeah, I'm glad that things are, as you say, coming back to a bit more common sense. So yeah, hopefully we'll carry on going in that direction.
That's good. And Emma, in a charity like Horse Welfare, how are you affected by health and safety and safeguarding?
Well, we take it very seriously. I think it's a very important matter. Just looking practically at how we've been helped with ensuring that we're up to date. I mean, it's really important to do risk assessments, and you'll find that often your insurance might be invalid if you haven't got a relevant risk assessment. But what you might find, and we found, is our insurance company was able to help us with that. So that's something to consider, that there are resources and help out there for that. We're very lucky. We also have a part-time health and safety advisor who's incredibly practical. He'll do all the dull things like test emergency lighting, but also he'll run the courses such as fire safety. And in fact, I've got mine next week, and I believe we get to put out a real fire, which is going to be very exciting. Something I've not done before. So that's very useful from that viewpoint. And then we also do have a good culture of training. So we have an annual management training day, and this year one of the key focus there will be on safeguarding, which of course is something that we do take incredibly seriously. And you can incorporate safeguarding within your risk assessments. So when I used to work for the NSPCC, I'd do risk assessments, but then as a part of that risk assessment, I would do a risk assessment which considered whether the children were there or, in fact, vulnerable young adults. So you could put in the various safeguards and controls to ensure that you were running your event safely and ensure that everybody was aware of that.
It's really helpful. I'm glad you've underlined how important it is. And I was very struck. The BHS advice is that, always make sure that you know that the establishment where you're placing your horse in its care has undertaken a fire risk assessment. And, that really came home to me recently when those horses had to be evacuated from the fire at, I think it was an exhibition centre, but where the car caught fire in the car park. I don't think until I saw that it had ever occurred to me that when I take my horse to an event or to a place, I need to actually think how I might approach that situation. And it was a kind of reminder that this is serious stuff when you really stop to think about it. You do need to undertake those assessments. It's worthwhile. It saves lives. So that is a serious point to end on. Now, we've got time for a fourth question, a different subject again, an interesting one about the retention of staff. Now, it's quite a broad-ranging question. There'll be a lot of you here who are employers with a duty of care to your employees. And I think I'm going to come back to Beth Maloney, who's going to ask us this question.
Yes, this has come again from Holly through Facebook. The question is, yards often find it a challenge to find and retain experienced staff. Any ideas on how to attract and retain staff, particularly on the smaller yards that may not offer as much variety as the bigger competition yards?
Really good question, and all of us, I think, know it is a challenge, the recruitment and retention of staff, and what a big impact it has on the yard if it's smaller, if you're short of members of staff, competent members of staff. Perhaps through the recent very cold snap, some of you will have experienced that because they couldn't get there to the yard. That was the reality, very tough. So with all our panellists, I think, would like to come in on this, but maybe I'll come to Nick first on this.
Okay. I think we're very lucky that we tend to get people that do want to come and work with us, and I guess we're perhaps not typical in that respect. But we offer the MVQ programs to all our sort of working students and staff that come in to try and give them something to work towards, and we work with Summer House, a company just up the road from us. They come in once a month, I think, and that seems to be very successful, and that gives people challenges and goals to work forwards to, and especially as we tend to get students that are under 18 years old, that's now compulsory that they have to stay in education of some form. So that works very well. Listen, this might not be what everybody wants to hear, but I often find that student or people that come to us having worked in a college don't always come with an understanding of what hard work is. I hope I can say that. You're all smiling, but retention of staff. I find if we manage to keep them more than a week or a fortnight, then they'll usually stay for a year, which is what our working pupils or students, apprentices now that they're called, what we encourage them to stay for. My head girl's been with us a lot longer, but I think some, and not all, and it's a massive generalisation, but some of the students sort of possibly muck out a couple of stables at the weekend and then come to us and perhaps don't quite understand that no, all these horses have to be mucked out every day, and it's not the most fun job in the world, and I would like to see the colleges perhaps take a little bit more responsibility for preparing some of their students for the real world. The horse world is tough. It's very tough. Life outside on the yard is definitely not for everybody. I love it. I love what I do. I'm afraid I don't get up and muck out every morning, but I have done, and I've done it for a lot of years. But yeah, it's not for everybody, and I think some of the students need to work that out sooner rather than later.
I think that's good, gritty, honest assessment of what it's actually like. And I certainly want to pay tribute to the girls on our yard who turned out in bitter conditions through this freezing cold weather, you know, to make sure that the horses' welfare was catered for. I do DIY at the weekends, and I was admiring the immaculate beds that they were making compared to my rather lumpy amateur alternative. And one of the girls just turned to me and said, yes, but I do this for a living. I take pride in doing it well. And I think, you know, just sometimes retention of staff is just about showing how much you appreciate what they do. And certainly as a Secretary of State, Lord Gardner, I used to always make sure I gave credit to the civil servants when they've done a really good job for me and in public. I think that's, you know, that goes over and beyond the basic remuneration package. It's just showing you how much you appreciate them. But I do want to reinforce what Nick said. Management of expectations is incredibly important. You know, thinking that you might like to go and learn how to work on a yard in the lovely months is so different from having to do it in the teeth of winter. And there needs to be a bit of management of expectation. We've got a variety of businesses here, many of whom take staff on work experience to start. So I'm going to ask Vicky, what's your view about how you successfully retain staff?
Well, we actually benefit from those people who aren't well equipped to work on the yard. So we tend to find that if somebody's gone, they've worked on the yard and it's not for them. Next step, I still want to work in equestrianism, I want to work in an office. Not usually the same situation. I think the main thing is I feel that there's been a very big shift in expectations, and also I think in past times people's the gratification that people got was very different. Now people want instant gratification. They want to know how great they are. They want to be told all the time. And unfortunately, you can't always do that in business. We've had to work with our good staff members that we want to keep, and we've had to work out what their individual motivators are. As a business, we try and ensure it's not all of our staff are paid minimum wage, because that's the general consensus with the retail industry. You go into a job, you're going to get paid minimum wage, and then you're going to be out. So we've tried to step away from that. We don't want to be stigmatised with we pay minimum wage and we have a high turnover of staff. We want to retain those staff who are good quality staff members, because they help drive our customer base. The customers know them, they're loyal to us because of those staff members. And the ways that we've found to incentivise our staff, they are horsey people. We sell horsey products. Them with discount structures for products which works well. We also work on a basis of a return system. So if we have faulty products, the first offer goes to all the staff members. And that works really well. It's something that doesn't cost us any money at all. It's product that would otherwise be disposed of, which would cost us money to dispose of. And it's amazing how a £50 rug can really drive staff motivation. And all the staff will muck in together, and they have a rota between them of who gets what. If it comes back in this size, it goes to this staff member. And just silly little things that you wouldn't think would be real motivational drivers, they are. And I think it's really important to identify those in your team. And also, if you do have issues with your staff members, I think small business, unfortunately, because you're so involved with running the business, you don't always step back and discuss with your staff what their concerns are, what their problems are. And I think it's really important to have regular meetings with staff. Even if you don't have the time, you have to make the time to just check that everybody's happy in their role, to ask if there's anything that can be changed to make their role better. Are there things that need adjusting, taking out of their workflow? They're not always possible, and in small business the staff need to be aware of what their roles are, but I think communication with the staff is key to ensure that they are happy and that you retain them.
Really good points for any business, that process of feeding back, and you know, I try to remember to do that about every 6 months as an employer, but I always say it's at least as much about what you don't like about the way I'm managing you as me telling you what I would like you to do better. It's a completely two-way process, and we have to be brave enough to hear from those we employ how we could do it better, and they have to have the confidence to tell you the truth. So creating that atmosphere of trust is very important. Now, charities usually find that people who want to come and work for them are highly motivated, because you have to have this altruism of wanting to do something for good. So do you find this issue of returning staff?
difficult? Or?
Well, for us, I guess, and most organisations, retaining staff starts with recruitment. So it's ensuring that you've got the right job description and the right advert in the first place, and really assessing what interview questions you're going to be asking. I like to do value-based interview questions, which are around the values of the organisation, which for me really help to show how people work as well as their experience. And then making sure that people have a good settling in period. The first 3 to 6 months in an organisation can, for some people, be completely terrifying. You've gone from a position where you're the font of all knowledge, and then to a position where you don't know how to make a cup of tea because you don't know where the kettle is. So it's very much about putting in a supportive induction process for that, probably a probation period, and then having an appraisal system, as was mentioned before, with regular one-to-one catch-ups and putting in training where necessary. But also when staff leave, it's incredibly valuable to have an exit interview with them and to see, just to learn from them and see how you can make that experience better. And I like to think that at World Horse Welfare we have a good working culture, and that comes sort of from the leadership team, and we discuss it regularly. We really value our staff. They're sort of your most important resource. And in addition, as I mentioned before, it's not just about pay, what you can pay. Of course, you want to pay your staff fairly and benchmark that, but it's also about the non-salary related benefits that have been mentioned before by fellow panellists. We, for example, have a cash health plan, which the staff appreciate and do use, so it's good to have benefits that they do actually use. Again, training, staff have the opportunity to specialise in areas, so potentially physio, and to take qualifications, so for example a HGV licence. So there's lots of things you put in place.
That's really good. Your last point, of course, HGV licence, that's really good. But it is very expensive to do your HGV licence. I don't know if that extends to paying the cost of putting in for it, but that's very valuable to a young person. And so we talked a lot about yards, Carol, and there's nothing better than a happy yard when everybody on it gets on well. You've got quite an interesting ratio of 10 members of staff to 25 horses. That sounds quite luxurious to me. But you know, what's your view on retention?
Well, actually, so yesterday we have a regular staff meeting. We have a staff lunch on a Wednesday, so they knew what I was coming to do today. They might even be watching. They're fantastic, my staff. No, they're amazing. And actually, we went around the table, and I said, how long have you all been here? Let's get the average length of time you've all worked. So we have had a girl who recently left to go to Mexico, had worked for us for several years, so we've got a new girl who's only been here a year. But the average length of time around the table was 7 years, and they all burst out laughing. You're going to have us forever, Carol. But no, I've got a happy team. They're a great team. And I mean, I look after them. I tell them they're great all the time. I pay them well because my business model can sustain it. They get lots of perks. They get training for exams. If we get, say, Mary King, Yogi Breisner came in, they'll get free tickets to stuff like that. We do lots of social events where our staff and clients mix. So, for instance, we had a ball last Saturday. It was fantastic. 130 people came. The girls could bring their partners, and they came to the ball. And just to show you how valued they are by my lovely clients, they happen to put £400 behind the bar for them. So I'm watching them getting more and more drunk throughout the evening, wondering who's going to be at work the next day. But no, I think it's just to, you know, to invest time in them. I love what I do. They love what they do. What you were saying about the early mornings, I mean, what's happened is actually with some of my staff, because I'm in London, and obviously accommodation is very expensive, some have moved miles away, can't find work where they are, and they commute. I've got a girl, Kate, who comes from Buckinghamshire every day. I mean, I can't believe she does it, but I'm glad she does, because she's great. But anyway, it's just looking up. But, you know, we changed her hours so she could come at miss the rush hour in the morning. So we try and work with our staff and keep them happy, because if they're happy, I'm happy, my customers are happy.
Quite so, a happy yard. Well, David Dilby at this point would say, we're running very short of time, but I've got one last thing that I'm going to ask each panellist. And it was a question that actually came into us. And the question actually was, what 4 things in an equine business should never be cut back, even when times are tight? So I'm going to ask each of the panellists to make a suggestion for what is absolutely, in their view, essential. Who'd like to start with that? Who'd like to go first?
I'm going to look at this from a retail perspective. So I feel what's key, other than obviously the factors that we've discussed, for our business model is marketing. Even when times are tough, I feel it is essential to market to your customer base. When times are tough, I think people think, oh, well, we'll take our foot off the gas a little bit, rein in the funds, and I think it's times like that you really need to invest in those areas that are going to generate the revenue for you, so that you can get yourself back up to where you need to be, so that you can reassess your marketing model for the future.
That's good. Very wise advice, right across every type of business. I'm sure you're right about that. Nick, what do you think? Should never cut back on.
I'm still trying to figure out what to cut back on, to be honest. We, with our lovely young stallion, we're breeding more and more horses, and we keep looking at the books and they don't balance, and we're enjoying it so much that we keep breeding them, and we're still trying to figure out what to cut back on. But it's a difficult question to answer, isn't it? Because actually, you know, you can't cut back on anything. In reality, the number of horses I suppose you have, but it's very difficult.
It's a difficult one. The question originated from horse welfare, so I don't know, Emma, if you'd like to tell us what you think. I think we can probably anticipate what you would say.
Well, one thing would be certainly...
Voice from on high. I think that's our 1 minute warning. Go on.
Vet bills, or vets, you shouldn't cut back on vet visits, even if you feel that it's not... Even if you feel it's not entirely necessary, you shouldn't cut back on vets.
Very good point. And the last word to our yard practitioner. What's the one thing you would never cut back on?
Well, obviously, horse welfare, rider welfare, staff welfare, but somebody really good in your office looking after your business. Because if you've got that, you'll have a good business.
Oh, very good last word, and well summarised. Well, we are spot on 12 o'clock, as the opera singer reminds us. The lady has sung, and we should just like to ask you to thank your panel in the usual way for their excellent advice. Great. What they do say at question time is, we'll just check that actually recorded. I'm sure it has. Right. Come on then.
Behalf, thank Dame Caroline for chairing that session. That went really well, so thank you very much, Dame Caroline. The rumours may be true. Well, I hope you enjoyed that last session. We now move into the final paper before lunch, and we're going to look at racing and the vital role of equine welfare and its perception within British racing. And I'm delighted that we got Nick Rust, the Chief Executive from the British Horse Racing Authority, to give the paper. So, Nick, welcome, and over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. Good afternoon, my lords, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for having me here today. For the next 15 minutes or so, I'd like to give you a bit of a perspective on British horse racing and really how much importance we do have to, want to, need to, and wholeheartedly give to the importance of equine welfare in our sport, because without it, we will have no sport and no social licence to be able to continue to operate an industry that employs about 17,000 people directly and around about 85,000 people indirectly. The current situation with regards to equine welfare in British racing moves by the day. Although it is a sport at the moment, British racing, that is very much on the up, with increasing revenues coming from the replacement of the previous levy which sustained central funding for the sport. The attitudes towards welfare, as I'm sure will be discussed at other points today or in and around this forum, continue to change. British Racing launched a campaign a number of years ago called Horse First in connection with our partners. within the RSPCA and also other organisations such as World Horse Welfare and others, to shine a light on the great work that goes on in British racing looking after our horses, right through from the point that they are bred to the point that they end their careers. But attitudes change every day, and we see that 30% of people regularly polled would have horse racing banned in our country, and another 20% are uncomfortable about some of the activities that take place in horse racing. So we cannot ever rest on our laurels, especially with a young generation of millennials now who are increasingly urbanised. 92% of people I read somewhere the other day have never been within 20 yards of a horse in their lives, in the age group up to 30 years old. So the connection and the traditional roots with horses and racing is in danger of being lost through generational change. We've seen at government level over the last few months a big shift in the way in which government and the opposition parties are looking at animal welfare. Everything from collars on pet animals right through to the rights or the sentience, if you like, of lobsters and how they're humanely or otherwise sent onto our dining tables. So attitudes have changed a heck of a lot over a number of years, and we can take nothing for granted, and our sport has to put right at the top of the agenda. The sport is changing. We have a great heritage, 300 years of British racing, world-renowned, world leader in racing. And our sport is on the up because of this revenue, because we're seeing growing audiences, growing betting, against the trends of the previous 2 decades. Our sport has to adapt to remain relevant for this younger generation. And as well as looking at welfare, which I'll cover, we have to be across trends in terms of diversity, in the way in which people are expected to be managed within our sport. But welfare is the one that we'll focus on today. We've started to introduce some measures to support a strategy which can grow our sport in this respect and grow its reputation. We've already put in a number of factors which can help us to have an overview of the life of a racehorse from the moment it's foaled through to the time it leaves this planet. 30-day foal notification is now in place in British racing, so that we can have sight of all of those horses that are bred intending to be run in British racing. That's a move from a year over 2 years ago, so that we have sight of what's going on in the breeding industry, with whom we work very closely alongside the racing activities. We now have around 13,000 other horses active in other disciplines through the work of the retraining of racehorses and others. And that work's only really just started, because although we have around about 30 registered organisations who look after that sphere, there are still a number of horses that are being traded at the end of their racing life, and we cannot trace them. So a major focus for British racing is to ensure that we have visibility on every individual racehorse and potential racehorse from birth through to grave. A bit about the BHA. We are the regulator of horse racing, recognised by government. We've been in position in this form since 2007. We grew out of some of the evolution of the reform of the Jockey Club, which was the regulator, but also, as you know, a private club with commercial interests. And the regulation element was split out from 2007. It's our job to make sure that we coordinate activities across sport and ensure the highest level of welfare standards, engaging with other organisations and making clear to the public and government where we're at. We are accountable to sport and to the public for welfare standards. We want, obviously, an evidence-based strategy, looking at how our horses are looked after, ensuring that we're funding that strategy to not only improve perception, which is pretty important at the moment, but to continue to fund improvements in actual welfare. Although racehorses are seen to be, and I think disputedly really, in government circles, and hopefully amongst the public who give our sport a chance, to be high health, high welfare status animals, we must continue to improve the care and the best practice that is involved in looking after them. The levy improvement gives us an opportunity to increase funding into research, which was cut back during the tougher times before levy improvement came in last year. We're very grateful to government for recognising the need to look after our sport at grassroots level, and it was very clear, along with us, that additional monies need to go into research on improving injuries and welfare for racehorses from that point of foaling right through to the grave. We intend, through the new Racing Authority, which will replace the Levy Board next year, to inject a significant amount of increased funding to ensure this research takes place and to encourage organisations to come forward and assist us with our cause to reduce career-ending injuries in our sport, to continue to reduce fatalities in our sport, which have reduced significantly over the last 20 years to now 0.2% of runners in British racing, down a third in the last 10 years. We also need to constantly monitor and work not only on behalf of racing but on behalf of others at looking at infectious disease. The globalisation of sport, the globalisation of populations means that we're at greater risk than ever of contracting catastrophic infectious diseases. And racing has a duty not only on its own behalf but to work with others to help ensure we don't have that sort of crisis. African horse sickness is an obvious one where there's a substantial threat, and we work with other racing countries and other authorities, and especially of course with DEFRA, to help ensure that we're being proactive, working with our partners at the Animal Health Trust and others to root out the possibility of these diseases affecting horses in our country. We must continue public trust and building that trust through engagement. I mentioned some of the figures before in terms of attitudes towards horses, awareness of horses, and awarenesses of racing. And our sport has been really, over the last 20 years, a little bit exclusive, a little bit inward-looking, and is finally really coming along with the need. Our participants are understanding the need around transparency, visibility, and so on. One of the things that struck me when I came into the job, not being a practitioner, being a 30-year career bookie, if you like, was just the attitude towards, for example, the use of the gun or other methods to humanely destroy horses, and the lack of awareness within our sport about the perceptions created, about attitudes, about which method you use, and how you communicate what's gone on when individual tragedies happen on the racecourse. And they do happen. We lose about 180 horses a year. But how we deal with that and how we communicate that and how we communicate how 20,000 horses in training a year are supremely looked after in our sport, and the measures that we take, not just because we love it, but because we have regulations in place to ensure that proper standards of care are in place. It's vital that we continue to get that through to the general public if we're to retain our social licence. The 35 million you see there of veterinary spend, we want to accelerate the rate of that, as I've suggested. At the BHA at the moment, we're increasing our own annual budgets so that we improve veterinary care, veterinary standards. We've introduced more checks on a race day, but also in out-of-competition level, to try and ensure that races which are fit and ready with the best chance to run well without run on the race course. In the last 6 months, we've carried out about 70 checks in yards, looking at horses following particular trends, just on the back of one initiative where we wish to identify and reduce injuries. The research that goes into that work and the analysis of the data needs to continue, and it's our job as the British Racing Authority to continue to make public those figures. For too long, we have been publishing fatalities in our sport, publishing the figures about them. Partly that was because we didn't have the full story on traceability, but I think partly it was for fear of a reaction in public. The right way to deal with it is to be open and clear and to be proud of our record in looking after racehorses. There's another reason that this is important as we face Brexit, which I'm sure everyone's fed up of talking about in many regards. So forgive me for going there again. But as many of you in the audience will know, British horse racing has a very strong relationship with a number of other countries, in particular France and Ireland, obviously both remaining as EU members. We have around about 25,000 horse movements between the three countries at the moment amongst breeding and racehorses. And movements are really without any level of significant bureaucracy. The movements take place because a tripartite agreement between the three countries was set up over 40 years ago, where the officials within the sports and governments at that time were convinced that because of the high health, high welfare status of the thoroughbred, the checks that might be in place for other forms of livestock did not need to be in place, and there would be effective free movement of the racehorse and of breeding stock. And day in, day out, the effect of that bill is felt in keeping our own industry, but also those in Ireland and France, flourishing. There is a danger that through Brexit, with that agreement being set aside necessarily, as it's part of the European regulations now, that unless we convince our government and European that these privileges, and they have been privileges, earned privileges, are maintained, that we will end up with the very real possibility of border controls. Given that 1/3 of horses that run in British racing are imported each year from either Ireland or France, that would have a significant impact on our industry, and also, of course, on the breeding industries, not only here but in Ireland and France. We'd like to see a level playing field between Ireland, France and Britain in terms of the regulations in each country pertaining to the movement of animals, but also in respect of the way in which horse racing is operated. And that high health, high welfare status is absolutely key to that if we are to convince our government to keep the borders open and to keep the prosperity of British racing intact over the next few years. So we face a very important set of discussions with government on this, and it's absolutely vital that we show that we are maintaining the highest levels of standard with regard to equine welfare. But above all else, I would say the main thing for British racing is we must keep ahead of public opinion and continue to challenge ourselves about some of the norms that have been accepted in our sport for a long time. The use of the whip is one, which is often discussed. And I sense in our sport now that we are ready to have those discussions because we recognise that the public wants to know that our horses are not only supremely looked after at all times in preparation, but also during races. And our sport is opening up and accepting the need to have those discussions. I think our sport has a bright future as long as it looks after this priority, and there are many organisations in this room with whom we work, and I thank you for your assistance in helping us with our programme. Thank you.
Excellent, Nick. Thank you very much. Any questions, comments for Nick? While the microphone's being passed around, we've sorted out the ghostly noise. It was a faulty mic picking up this noise, so relax. It wasn't anything else, in case you were worried.
Hello, I'm Andy from Red Wings Horse Sanctuary. Thanks very much for the presentation. It's hugely encouraging to see how central welfare is being placed for British horse racing. I have probably quite a novice question to ask, so it might be really easy. I wondered how much are these measures going to extend to harness raced horses, trotters and pacers in this country? And that's it really. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Well, we don't regulate or look after the interests of harness racing at the moment, but I think we recognise that there are a number of other similar pursuits where we can, providing high health, high welfare status is embodied in the sport or the activity, where we would want to work and partner with other organisations in the discussion. and very willing to do that and pick that up with the authorities there. We haven't at the moment, specifically with harness racing. We do have discussions on other matters, but I can pick that up, and I think it's a good thought. Thank you.
Thank you for that. At the back.
Thank you. Louise Kemble. I'm a thoroughbred breeder. I'd just like to say that I've used the 30-day foal notification process, and that's worked very well. Thank you very much. And I'd like to ask whether my fellow breeders in Northern Ireland are doing the same thing.
I don't know. We are trying to, as you know, we regulate in Great Britain, so the requirement is not on Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is regulated as part of an all-Ireland racing environment there. We are obviously talking to government about the implications of Brexit on Northern Ireland. We have had some contact from parties in Northern Ireland with regards to the future and perhaps hedging their bets to ensure that their businesses can flourish, be they racecourses or breeders and so on. At this stage, unless the Irish authorities follow suit, which we sincerely hope they will, and my perhaps rather too subtle comment is we want to see a level playing field with France and Ireland through this as well, then I would sincerely hope that they will follow suit. It would make sense to do so. If we're looking for harmonisation on horse movement and traceability and so on, then it would make sense for that to happen. I think the Irish authorities are pretty forward-looking, and if it's not just forward-looking, they're self-interested in terms of their industries, and I think they're moving along in that direction anyway, Louise. Thank you.
One there, and then a quick one from Rowley after. Yeah.
Hello, Gillian Carlisle, the British Thoroughbred Retraining Centre. I'd just like to applaud the BHA on the importance that they now place on the whole life cycle of the horse, and in particular upon the horse when they retire. My question is, however, as the retraining process bridges the gap between racing and many of the equestrian organisations in this room, what importance does the BHA place on the whole retraining sector as a whole for a way to move forward? Thank you.
Thanks, Gillian. Huge. And I think retraining, rehousing, rehoming, and obviously I know you do, I've seen the work you do. There's a lot more to be done, I think, at a strategic level on this. We have our own charity in retraining of racehorses, do some excellent work. When it was set up, it was almost ahead of its time, I feel. And it has found itself making progress, but demand and public opinion has moved on so much that we now know that we have a much bigger need, especially given the size of our industry, for rehoming our horses. So I feel at the moment it's going to take the next 6 months before we can coordinate with British Equestrian Federation and others on their activities to ensure that we have something that makes sense and isn't too siloed. I'm pretty confident we'll get there because there are a lot of talented people working in the space who are passionate about it, and I think there's an acceptance within our sport that we need to move on. And we've got a bit of central money to put behind it. So I see this as not just within racing, but as you suggest, wider than racing, on a wider equine basis. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Rowley. Last one before lunch, in case your tummy's
Nick, thank you. We obviously applaud the work you're doing around equine welfare. I just wonder if, in terms of maintaining that social licence, many people would expect thoroughbreds to be well looked after. Many people would expect the horse to come first. So I wonder if the messaging shouldn't be starting to take a step further, because if we are to convince people that using horses for racing, for sport is the right thing, they would take that as a minimum and would expect more.
Yes, and I think perhaps we're not showing that perhaps we do a bit more than people expect, but I take your point fully. And one of the points around racing being, feeling a bit on the up at the moment, with a bit more money coming in, is that we have the opportunity to, as I say, modernise our sport generally. And we are, at the moment, undertaking a piece of work on our visions and values to unite the sport. One of the key areas is around equine welfare, and we're working with agencies at the moment effectively on a pitch around this, because we want to revamp it and put it not so much as an explaining, communicating organisation, horse comes first, but putting it right at the heart of our strategy. So we're looking at fresh messaging at the moment, and we'll involve you shortly.
Good. Thank you very much. Great, Nick. Thank you very much. Good presentation. Right, ladies and gentlemen, it is now lunchtime. I hope you'll agree we've had a really good morning. Those of you who are regulars here will know that we have the bowl mentality, and those of you who will know that there are 4 of the small bowls you are allowed. Each, you can have 3 from the main course and 1 for the pudding. And as I've said on numerous occasions, people will be...
Thanks so much for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed the live stream. I'm going to move out of the way so that everyone can get to their lunch, because we are taking a break now for an hour, so we'll see you back here at 1+1, and we're going to be talking about rural crime, safety in equestrianism, and I'm really looking forward to hearing Sue Dyson talk about the rider weight study. So you get to have a break, grab a drink, a cup of coffee, and some lunch, and we'll see you back here at 1+1.
Sure.
Yes. Well done, Tori. Thank you. Thank you.
Go, no. Yeah, no, I'll just take...
These horses weigh more than half a ton. Imagine what would happen if you hit one. Since 2010, more than 2,900 road incidents involving horses have been reported to the British Horse Society. Of these, 39 caused rider deaths and 230 resulted in a horse dying from their injuries or being put to sleep. No matter how you feel about horses on the road, it's important to be aware that colliding with one puts you and your vehicle at serious risk. By following these simple steps, you can help protect yourself, your car, and the people around you. When you come across a horse and rider or carriage driver, immediately begin to slow down. Be patient. Wait far enough behind the horse so that you're able to see some tarmac between you. Don't sound your horn or rev your engine. Pass slowly at a maximum speed of 15 miles per hour and give the horse plenty of room. When you're clear of the horse, carefully move back over to your side of the road and drive away slowly. Only pass a horse if it's safe to do so. Don't try and rush past ahead of oncoming traffic, or if vehicles are parked on the opposite side of the road, or on a hill or a blind bend. Trying to save a couple of seconds could prove very costly. Horses are animals, and like all animals, even the calmest and most experienced can become scared or intimidated. If the horse becomes unsettled, please be patient and give the rider time to react. Please be respectful that at times riders may need to ride two abreast. Often this is to protect young or inexperienced horses or riders. Be aware that the rider may ask you to slow down or stop and wait. Riders can often see and hear things that you can't. So to recap, when passing horses, slow down to 15 miles per hour. Be patient. Don't sound your horn or rev your engine. Pass horses wide, at least a car's width. Drive slowly away. Remember, it's not just the horse that will suffer when involved in a road incident. The impact can cause significant damage to a vehicle and the people in it. Don't let this be you. Protect yourself, protect your vehicle, protect horses and riders.
Probably the most shocking thing was that it was like a graveyard with the walking dead.
They had so many lice on them that we had to do a full body clip to get rid of all the parasites before we could even start treating them.
The scale of it seemed enormous.
I think it opened the eyes of many members of the British public who hadn't seen animal cruelty before.